Hey, how we doing, folks? It is Sunday, February 12th, 2017. Rich Fantastic giving you the weekly NBA report. Starting as we always do in the Eastern Conference. Still pretty sharp at the top. Cleveland Cavaliers are starting to right the ship, 7-3 in their last 10. They got a victory last night over the Denver Nuggets. You have the Boston Celtics at 35-19. They did end their 7-game winning streak with a loss the other night to the Sacramento Kings. That was on Wednesday. They've responded with 2 wins on the road, though. They've been west. They're 9-1 in their last 10. Washington continues to impress, also 9-1 in their last 10. They're 32-21. The Celtics at 35-19, splitting the difference between Cleveland and Washington at 2.5 behind Cleveland and 2.5 in front of the Wizards, who are 5 behind the Cleveland Cavaliers. Washington Wizards, as well as they're playing, very good at home, 23-7, but 9-14 on the road, as opposed to the Cavaliers, who are 23-5 at home, 14-11 on the road. That's really much of the difference in the 5 games. And the Celtics are 16-11 at home, but they have a weaker home record, or 16-11 on the road, but a weaker home record than the Wizards at 19-18. You know, the conversation is who could potentially dethrone the Cleveland Cavaliers on top of the East between the Celtics and the Wizards. Likely both of these teams would be in a road situation if they played the Cleveland Cavaliers. You always like to see the better road record there, which the Celtics possess. Toronto still struggling a bit. While they are plus 4.5 in their differential, they're 4-6 in their last 10. They've really been in a lull, sort of dragging their way through this part of the season. Let's see what happens after the All-Star break for them. They are 32-22. They are 14-13 on the road, but I'd like to see what happens after the All-Star break with the Toronto Raptors. Atlanta, they're 5-5 in the last 10. They've dropped into the minus in their differential, however. The Indiana Pacers, 29-25. A team I was really expecting more from. It looked like they were turning things around. They had won 7 straight, but now they are on a 3-game losing streak. They just lost to the Wizards the other night. Jeff Teague starting to get his assist numbers up, also averaging 15.6 points and 4.1 rebounds. He's putting together very, very respectable numbers. Jeff Teague is a good player. That's why I'm surprised this team is still struggling. But you do have Paul George at 22.5 points. Now, 22.5 is not bad by any means, but for Paul George, you expect a bit more from him. I would have had Indiana probably where Washington is. It doesn't really surprise me that Washington's coming back, having a comeback year. But it's really surprising me that the Indiana Pacers, after adding a player of Jeff Teague's caliber, a team that went to the playoffs last season, you have a Paul George, they're not able to turn things around. Chicago, 26-28. You start to get to the bottom of the Eastern Conference. Chicago's likely going to be the 7th spot, or Chicago's likely going to make the playoffs. Whether a team behind them can pass them, that's another thing to be seen. Detroit, 25-29. Both teams, the Bulls and the Pistons, are 5-5 in their last 10. Charlotte is really struggling. I talked about Toronto before, going through the dog days, whatever you want to call it, lulling through before the All-Star break. Charlotte, while they still are plus 4 in their differential, they're 1-9 in their last 10. They were well above 500. This team is, crumbling, and it's very surprising. This is a 48-win team from last year, got off to a good start. You have Kemba Walker, so I don't know what necessarily the situation is for them. Miami, they just had their 13-game winning streak snapped. They are 24-31, however, only a game and a half back of the Detroit Pistons for the last spot. This is another team that won 48 games last year. Granted, you did lose Dwayne Wade. Chris Bosh you had for points last year, or for periods of time, I should say, not points. He's obviously missed all of this season. So you let those things play in a dynamic a little bit. But Eric Spoelstra, a good coach. Let's see if that team continues to rise and can even get to above 500. But I'd be surprised by that. And then, teams like Milwaukee, the Knicks. The Knicks will probably have to do another video on just to discuss that entire situation, of course, with Charles Oakley. These were teams that you look at and you could say, all right, maybe make some noise. Going into the season, the Knicks were 14-10 at one point. They are 8-23 since then, just really struggling. Milwaukee just can't seem to figure it out. I don't know if it's necessarily the point guard play. You have Antetokounmpo, who's obviously putting up big numbers. But Milwaukee, I don't know what they're missing necessarily. You have guys like Antetokounmpo. You have a Jabari Parker. I mean, Antetokounmpo's numbers 23.5, 5.5 assists. So I'm confused by that team, really. Greg Monroe, does he not fit the style they're playing? I don't know. It's very confusing with the Milwaukee Bucks, the Knicks especially. Well, with the Knicks, I look at them. You bring in 2 point guards, I would feel that would help with Carmelo Anthony. Derrick Rose, of course, was more of a shoot first, athletic guy, of course, back in his heyday. I figured coming into this season, he would be looking to more distribute more because he doesn't really have the athleticism he could rely on in the past. That would help Carmelo Anthony. You bring in Brandon Jennings, those things have not helped. It's very surprising, and there's, of course, a lot of different dynamics. The Magic lost last night. They're 20-36, still fairly respectable, though. At the bottom of the Eastern Conference up until the Brooklyn Nets were, of course, 9-45 losers of 12 straight. They have just completely fell apart this year. But you look, everyone else over 20 wins in the Eastern Conference pre-All-Star break. So even Orlando, I would expect to get to 30 wins, but of course, a lot of that is teams can beat up on the Brooklyn Nets. Moving into the Western Conference, the Golden State Warriors, of course, still setting the pace, 46-8. I was watching them the other night. They were really taking apart the Oklahoma City Thunder. There's really just too many offensive weapons on this team. Still plus 13.3 in the differential. They're averaging 118 points per game this season. That is by far the most of anyone. Cleveland is the only other team above 110 at 111, or excuse me, Houston is also above that at 114. So Houston pushing the pace in that regard. But you look, Houston's differential is plus 6.7, just below half of what the Golden State Warriors are. So they're averaging just under 4 more points per game, but they're less than half of the differential. That shows the difference there. San Antonio 41-12, just doing what they do quietly under the radar. Of course, they do have a nationally televised game against the New York Knicks later on today. Houston 40-17. They got a win last night. They really drubbed the Phoenix Suns. They were up by 40 at points in that game, only ended up winning by 31. Of course, James Harden, the numbers continue to impress, 29.1 in the points, 11.3 in the assists, and he is leading the team in rebounding at 8.2 for a shooting guard. Utah Jazz, they were beaten by the Boston Celtics last night. Going to talk more about that with the Celtics, but that's still a team. You would have liked to see them being able to handle what's a good Boston Celtics team at home. They really were taken apart by the Celtics in that one, so that gives me the questions about the Utah Jazz. Then you have the Clippers and the Memphis Grizzlies battling out for 5 and 6. The fifth seed, assuming Utah hangs on to the fourth, whatever, I would expect Utah's either going to be the fourth or the fifth, and the Clippers and the Grizzlies are going to be battling out for the other one of those two teams. They would have the Utah Jazz, who are a team who hasn't been to the playoffs. Of course, Memphis and the Clippers are veteran teams. They've been there before, which would set up an interesting dynamic because I would expect either one of those teams to beat the Jazz. Then they would play the Golden State Warriors in the second round. The Clippers, they need Chris Paul back. They have been able to win 2 straight. They got a win last night against the Charlotte Hornets. They're 4-6 in the last 10, however. Memphis at 33-23. Still very impressive. 7-3 in the last 10. They're 15-13 on the road. What's very impressive is they're 6-1 in that division. That division includes the San Antonio Spurs and the Houston Rockets. It's always been one of the stronger ones. Of course, they have the Dallas Mavericks as well. The Mavericks have been coming on of late. We'll get into them when we get down on the schedule. The Pelicans, but not the best of teams. But of course, Dallas is really starting to surge, and the Pelicans are not terrible, and they do have Anthony Davis. Oklahoma City, they're 5-5 in their last 10. 31-24. They're starting to sputter just a bit. I think Russell Westbrook, while he's not running out of gas, they're forcing him to do everything. They're really handling guys like Oladipo. His numbers are still good, but there's really no help for him, and there's only so much this guy's going to be able to do, which he is doing, but everyone else really needs to pick up the pace. Denver, of course, everyone else is well below 500 after the top 7. They are 24-30. Who's going to get that spot? You have Denver from 8-9, Portland, 10 Sacramento, 11 Dallas, 12 New Orleans, 13 Minnesota. They're all separated by 4 games there. So we'll see what happens. The Lakers are really starting to come down. They got off to a decent start but they're struggling. But 19 and 37, they're showing marked improvements. You can obviously see that. Let's see if they can avoid 50 losses. And then the Phoenix Suns. All right, the power rankings, of course, Golden State #1 and San Antonio #2. No surprises there. Going to keep Houston at #3, and I am going to give the Celtics #4. They're 9-1 in their last 10. That was probably their most complete game. The way they played against Utah was very impressive last night. And then the Cleveland Cavaliers #5 in the power rankings. All right, be sure to stay tuned. We'll come back in a little bit and give you the Celtics report in just a few moments. Thank you all so much, and remember, we appreciate all subscriptions as well. We'll see you in a little bit.